$46,000 Vercel bill. How does that possibly happen? This was the creators of Gmail. They've taken every single one of the Epstein emails and built this like Gmail interface so you can sort of click through and read them and load them and filter them by different people. It's a really sick website, but they've racked up a $46,000 Vercel bill. I have large sites running on Vercel, Cloudflare, and VPS, and I did some quick back of the napkin math, and I think I know where most of this bill went to, and we're gonna break it down so hopefully it doesn't happen to you as well. Let's break it down into four sort of categories. You got compute, bandwidth, requests, and like special add-on services, right? So compute is when your application actually needs to run some processes, right? Whether it's fetching data from the database, or looping over arrays, whether it's handling a URL and routing it to wherever you go, that is when your server actually needs to do work. And almost all of the content on this website actually is fairly static content, right? If you go ahead and look at a lot of these requests that are coming in, you'll see that it's just JSON that's coming in, right? So it's just text. Text can be cached very heavily. The stuff on here is not changing very often. The guy's dead, right? He's not sending any more emails. Well, I guess that's maybe up for debate, but there's a lot of stuff that can be cached on here. So I don't know. It certainly is probably a big expense here, but probably not the biggest one because they're not doing things like they're not OCRing on demand. They're not doing any really heavy intensive stuff. They are simply just rendering out React elements on a page and then caching those heavily. So the next one is bandwidth. And this is probably a big one, but not what you might think, right? You think like, oh, images and whatnot. So if you go to one of the images that are on this website, you'll see that they are hosted on a totally separate domain name. And this URL here and the header, looking at the headers, tells me they're using Cloudflare image transformations to resize them. So they're not as big to load on page load, and they're not using up as much bandwidth. So most of the images on here are not even part of that Vercel bill because they're hosted totally separately. But if we go, let's go to this homepage here, do a hard refresh, and then sort them by size, you'll see there are some things that are being hosted on this. This biggest one right here is over 0.5 meg for a little icon that's being loaded here. If we open that up in a new tab, it's just a little Facebook icon, not compressed at all, and probably way larger than it needs to be, and probably could be in SVG. So serving that up, plus there are several other like images that are being loaded in here, and adding all those up, it's about 1 meg. Plus, you're looking at all of the JavaScript and CSS bundles that are being loaded up. That's probably close to another meg as well. So every single person visiting the website, fresh cache, they're using 2 megs of bandwidth, which is quite a bit. Then the other part of the bandwidth here is this aggressive preloading. So if I go to my dev tools, I'm going to filter for XHR. And then as I simply just scroll, you'll see that there's like tons of requests being fired off. Now, I have my cache disabled here, so they are loading from my disk cache. But the first time that you hover over top of those, you'll see it's just a bunch of JSON being loaded, but they are aggressively loading them all in. Now, that is a very high trade-off. And I did a video about how McMaster-Carr does this as well. Because now when you click on some of these, they load extremely fast. Quite honestly, it's faster than Gmail. This is a very good experience. So you have a bit of a trade-off where, yeah, I will aggressively preload everything in, even though we might not use that, but you are giving them a really nice experience. But that's not free. Sending all of this JSON over the wire still use quite a bit of bandwidth. Now you're probably screaming right now, being like, that's just text. That's static text that probably does not change very often. You can cache the crap out of that. And that's exactly what they're doing. I don't know if this happened before or after the $46,000 bill, but you'll see here, they did throw Cloudflare in front of Vercel, which Vercel doesn't really like you doing, but you can see that there is a cache status of hit here, meaning that should now not go past Cloudflare and then send the request to Vercel, which would then incur them bandwidth, as well as which we'll talk about next is requests. I think that was added after, but you see there is a pretty aggressive 30-day and 7-day stale while validate. So that brings me to the next one, which is simply just paying for requests. So the way that a lot of these serverless platforms work is that they will charge you for how much time you are using in compute, but then they will also charge you based on how many requests you are sending them. And because you load the page up here, you get, I don't know, 50 requests to different parts of it. You know, you're loading in JavaScript and CSS, and then there's some React server components that need to load in different requests. And then, of course, once you start hovering over all of these things, that just fires up the amount of requests. So you spend a minute or so kind of just looking around, hovering over things, clicking on different emails. You get up to 500 requests fairly quickly. And in this case, it's just over a meg. If you load a couple emails, I was able to get it up to about 3 megs worth of it. So if you're doing some quick math on that, 500 requests, 3.5 megs for an average visitor just visiting for a minute or so. Vercel's on-demand bandwidth is 15 cents per gig here. And then it also is $2 per 1 million edge requests. So if you're looking at me doing, I don't know, 500 requests, 3.5 megs, that would cost them a tenth of a penny. That's not much, right? A tenth of a penny. That's almost nothing. But remember what they're doing here: 650 million page views. That's a lot of page views. That will add up. My math shows me that, like, without any sort of caching or anything in front of it, that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. Obviously, the bill wasn't hundreds of thousands of dollars because of what they've done to implement the cache there, but that simply will add up. Those tenth of a pennies add up. Now, the next one, which is like add-ons. So they actually, Vercel stepped up and said, yeah, like, we'll cover the bill, which was really cool of them. And then they went through it and said, like, yeah, like, we're going to figure out how to get this thing as cheap as possible. And it turns out 36% of the bill was simply from web analytics. So what pages do people visit? Like, where are they coming from? What browser? All of that stuff that you get in analytics. But the thing that sort of killed them here is that the analytics double dip on the request. So you're paying for analytics, but then you're also paying for those requests, those edge requests that are going in there. And if you take a look here, remember, $2 per 1 million. And if you're logging all kinds of data being sent over here, that adds up very quickly. So Guillermo goes on to mention that, like, sampling is probably a good approach here. And this is exactly what Sentry does as well. Is if you can send every error that happens on your website to Sentry, but if you have enough traffic, that's likely too much, and you don't necessarily need all of that data at super high volume. So what you can do is just sample those, and you still get all of the information that you're looking for. You don't need to know that 50,000 people had like a missing undefined variable on there. Simply 50% of that or 25% of that will be enough. Processing and storing data is not cheap. My personal opinion, 17 grand for analytics seems extremely high, but I think we all got used to using Google Analytics as a free product. We didn't realize how expensive holding, processing, storing all of that data actually is. Now, the question is would Cloudflare be cheaper, right? So we sort of know what the big costs were here, right? There was bandwidth, there was requests, and then there was those analytics being added on here. So let's go through it. So Vercel and Cloudflare both have the ability to charge based on what's called CPU time. You have an 800 millisecond serverless function that's running, but maybe you're only using 50 milliseconds, 30 milliseconds of that to do actual compute. You're looping over an array, you're creating objects, you have classes, things like that is actual compute. Whereas, like, if you send off a fetch request and you're waiting 200 milliseconds for like an AI to respond, you don't have to pay for that time, which is really cool. That's different from traditional serverless, where you're simply just paying for the time that thing is running. So Cloudflare calls that wall time versus CPU time, and Vercel calls that fluid compute. Next one is bandwidth. Cloudflare is mostly free. Everybody likes to say Cloudflare is the bandwidth is free, and that is mostly true. But for the images that they're hosting on Cloudflare here, you certainly pay for that product, and you pay to hold those images. You pay based on number of transformations that you use, the number of requests that go to that. But things like your CSS, your JavaScript, those sort of static assets that can be cached, you don't pay for bandwidth on those types of things, which is really, really nice. So that would have significantly decreased their bill, especially for their 650K little logo that they have here. Next one is requests. So this is kind of a weird one, because if you put Cloudflare in front of an existing website, maybe you host it on like a VPS, or maybe you host it on Vercel, and you throw this cache control header and the CDN cache control header on there, what that will do with Cloudflare is Cloudflare will simply just serve up the cache version. However, if you are programmatically doing your cache as part of your worker, or if you are hosting your entire website on a worker, it still hits your worker on Cloudflare, and you still pay for that request to Cloudflare, even if you simply are serving up. I hit this with my own personal website. It's like, that seems higher. I was trying to cache entire HTML pages, but because my entire site was inside of a worker, even though I was serving up the cache version of that HTML, I still paid for that request to there. But let's talk about the actual prices of this thing. So requests on Cloudflare are, you get 10 million a month, and then 30 cents per million. And then your CPU time, you get 30 million CPU milliseconds. Essentially, this works out to being 7.2 cents per hour. That's not like you don't take 7.2 cents and multiply by 24. That's just basically how much time those processes are running. Taking a look at Vercel, we saw this already, $2 per 1 million requests versus 30 cents on Cloudflare. And then CPU time is about 12 cents, 13 cents an hour. So between those three things, significantly cheaper CPU time, significantly cheaper bandwidth, or free bandwidth in many cases, and then also significantly cheaper requests, you probably would have been a lot lower. There's a lot to be said for Cloudflare here, and the reason why not absolutely everybody is on Cloudflare is because the Vercel DX is the best. And I say this as someone who absolutely loves Cloudflare. I've got many gripes with it. Like the other day, we couldn't get logs for preview URLs. You can't get custom domains for preview URLs. Having like staging and production is a pain in the butt. There's lots of things which on Vercel, sharing, I couldn't share a worker with somebody. The solution to was move the entire domain and worker to a different Cloudflare account, and then you can share that entire account with somebody else. So the tooling on Vercel is significantly better, but a lot of people will simply just say, I'm okay with a little bit of pain or figuring out these oddities on Cloudflare for the price. Now, analytics. Cloudflare has free web analytics. As far as I can tell, they are at feature parity, and I don't think that they count towards your actual requests, and you don't have to pay for them. So that again, that's $17,000 that would have been saved. Now, what about a VPS? Could you have done this on a $5 a month like DigitalOcean? Could you host it in your grandma's basement, that type of thing? Maybe you would certainly have to put an aggressive cache in front of it, and you would have to set up auto scaling, load balancing, all of that type of stuff. So I don't know, like Render, Railway, these types of things, for $46,000, you can let those things scale up to 7, 8, 9, 10 different instances for quite a bit cheaper than $46K. But the thing that people aren't talking about with these VPSs is that like you still need a CDN in front of these things that will handle all of your caching, because bandwidth coming from a VPS is extremely expensive. So my thoughts here. 1, this bill would not have been nearly as large on Cloudflare. 2, this site would have definitely have crashed on a VPS, or have had a hug of death from it, right? There's always that thing like, should you go down or should you pay more when you get these crazy spikes in traffic? And then 3rd, this site and many other people's hobby projects may not have launched if it wasn't for Vercel. Vercel has made this stuff super easy to sort of just publish and out there. However, we hear these stories all the time where something gets popular and somebody goes, shoot, this thing is costing way more than I thought it would. Everything in life is a trade-off. There's Open Next where you can host Next.js on Cloudflare. Not perfect. I tried it myself for quite a while and I ended up just scrapping Next entirely, moving to Waku. But build on tech that can be moved absolutely anywhere, so that if something like this happens to you and you have the fortune of having an extremely popular website, hopefully it's not going to cost you an arm and a leg.